Hi, I'm your host, Lauren Epstein. Normally, I would say you're listening to You're Hired. However, today we're changing the name of the show. When we started the program, in the summer of 2016, I had submitted the application to the station, and they needed a name of the show, and I couldn't think of anything, so I used the title of my book, which is You're Hired. And that just seemed to work, not having a good title. But we've done so many shows now, over 60, and we really feel like the show has kind of gotten bigger. And so a new name had to be created. And I have to say I'm comfortable and uncomfortable with the new name of the show, but I like it and everyone likes it, so that's what we're going to do. So the new name of the show is The Lauren Epstein Show. Obviously, that's my name, so there's a certain amount of unwanted attention, but that seemed to be the best idea to go forward because it's so broad. We've done shows on pot in the workplace, shows on the salary secrecy laws, shows on immigration. Today we'll be doing a show on the skills gap. So I'm Lauren Epstein, and welcome to The Lauren Epstein Show. Da, 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 da. And some other amazing news today. My production engineer, Afote, is engaged. Yay. Yeah, right.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great.
He asked her after only 5 years,
Yes.
and she said yes, which was, I think, he was very lucky. She's a lovely lady, so congratulations, Afote.
Appreciate it, Lauren.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to the show. It's a great show. I've got some really fantastic guests. Those of you who know me know that it's my passion to support people in finding the right job. And one of the problems we have now in our country is that we have 6 million people who are unemployed, and we have millions and millions of jobs. And you might say, well, why is that? And it comes down to one basic thing and lots of system problems. But the basic thing is that those people who are unemployed don't have the right skills for the jobs that are out there. And I've noticed over the last couple of years, there are a lot of organizations and a lot of folks kind of in their silos doing real stuff to bridge this gap. And today I have two of them. One who has been doing this, I guess for both of them doing this for like a good chunk of their lives. And I'll introduce them. But the theme of the show today is kind of when you're hearing this is how can we support people in finding the education they need to get the jobs that are available? And that's really the theme of today's show. So I want to introduce my guests. So I have with me Karan Chopra. Karan is the co-founder and executive vice president of Opportunity at Work, which is here in D.C. He leads the direction of his organization's priorities, as well as the Talent Financing Initiative, which we'll hear more about. Karan believes that meaningful work is not just a matter of economic well-being, but brings dignity to people. Karan is bringing opportunity to people who are talented so they realize their true potential, which is awesome. He believes that in order to have impact at scale, we need better systems, which is very true. Welcome to the show, Karan.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And also, we have Tom Adams, who's a returning guest. Welcome back, Tom.
Thank you.
Tom was the CEO of Rosetta Stone. And if those of you who don't know Rosetta Stone, you were underneath the stone for the last 20 years. And left once the company went public in 2009. He's currently the co-founder of Pedago. Do I have that right?
Pedago.
Pedago. Maybe it needs a little accent over.
I got it.
It's an educational technology company that developed Smartly, which is SMART.ly. You should go check that out. It's a smartphone-based learning tool that leads people through a comprehensive business education and a free MBA. The company's goal is to help making learning dramatically faster and more effective. So I'm really glad you guys are here because you are solving this problem right now. So, Karan, why don't you start off, give us a little bit of background on the organization and what you're doing now to help people.
Happy to, and it's great to be here. So, Opportunity at Work, our mission, social venture, working to create an opportunity or a future where all Americans can work, learn, and earn to their full potential. And that is so important because I believe there are 70 to 80 million Americans today out of 160 million labor market that are stuck in one way, shape, or another. And that has impact on them individually, but it has a huge impact on our economy, on our society, on how we function, and our social contract.
What do you mean by social contract?
I mean the idea that if I learn X, work hard at Y, I will get ahead in way Z. That basic premise
Sure.
is not true for millions
Right.
of people.
Unfortunately.
And that manifests itself in many different ways, including their own economic well-being and, as I say, a sense of self-worth and dignity. Opportunity at Work itself focuses on 3 areas. The first is on how do we make hiring more based on demonstrations of skill and not based on pedigree screens that exist in the market today. The second is working through a network of partners. How do we make learning more accessible and accessible? And the third piece is how do we rethink the way the financing of the education to employment pathway is done to be based on someone's future potential, not their past, and with the incentives aligned to their outcomes. All 3 of which I think are broken in our labor market today and are fundamental issues around the quote-unquote skills gap.
And what's the origin story of Opportunity at Work?
So the origin story is that I had been working on a very similar problem in West Africa. This was in Ghana and in Nigeria, thinking about how you address the issues of youth unemployment and the issues of income inequality that exist in that region. When I was selling my previous venture, my co-founder, Byron Geest, had been working on this problem both from a policy angle. So he was deputy director at the National Economic Council under the former administration, and then 20 years at McKinsey thinking about human capital over there. And we got together and said this was a problem that we wanted to attack. At the same time, we had worked on and had announced through a public-private partnership an initiative called TechHire, which we support. And the notion was, how do you get millions of people into well-paying technology jobs that exist across the country? And so TechHire is an initiative that Opportunity at Work supports. That's a multi-local movement that exists now in 72 places in the country.
And so what your organization does is gets funding from where?
So we are privately funded. So our anchor is a high net worth individual, and we have institutional foundation dollars. We are a nonprofit ourselves. We're a 501c3.
Not supported by the government.
We're not.
Right.
No.
And then you take those dollars and bridge the gap of getting particular people training in particular things and helping them get employed, or is it just the training component?
So this is what we do. We aggregate a network of employers who have said that they're going to hire based on demonstrations of skill. We co-develop ways for individuals to demonstrate their skill that is not tied to their pedigree. And if they can demonstrate the skill, there'll be employers waiting for them on the other end to get jobs. We then work with a network of training providers. We don't do any training ourselves of how people can then get those skills. And then the last thing that we do, which is going to be a pilot this fall, is rethinking of the way financing is done for those pathways, which is more at this stage a proof of concept of how the system should work.
Exciting. And so how many folks have you gotten jobs for?
So the TechHire Network has now placed over 4,000
Wow.
people into jobs.
And that's in the United States?
That's in the United States.
Wow.
So it's all in the U.S.
Is there all in the U.S.? Is there any particular area, state, or?
So those 4,000 that have been done through the TechHire Network are all across the country. This is in St. Louis, it's in New York, it's in Mobile, Alabama, it's in Eastern Kentucky. It really is everywhere. Of course, some places are thriving more than others on that number.
Is there a theme of where you're at geographically? Or is it just where people say, I'm interested?
Right. So because the training pathways and the community pathways that we support are not done directly by us, they're done with partner organizations, it really is everywhere where an organization raises their hand and they say, we want to build a TechHire ecosystem in our local area. Because everywhere you go, you have people who want these jobs, you have employers who are struggling to fill these jobs, and you have training providers, you have community organizations who want to serve people. So really this movement in 72 places has been driven by local organizations that have raised their hand and said, we're going to build this ecosystem.
Yeah, that's interesting. The Bureau of Labor Statistics had an interesting factoid about 18 months ago, where the new statistic is that now there are more jobs than there are people, which is like the first time in the history of them tracking this that happened. And another interesting factoid is that the majority of the fastest growing jobs are in low skill, low wage jobs. So, I mean, obviously we all want people to make a good income, but because they're low skill, it makes training them much easier and making the transference of people working in job A to job B to job C much more smooth. Yeah.
So to that, I'll say a couple of things. One is our deliberate focus on IT roles, and this is across all roles within IT, from web developer to network administrator to IT help desk database, is because there are about 600,000 plus open jobs in that occupational category, all of which are middle class, firmly middle class jobs. And they exist, the vast majority of them exist outside of the tech sector. These are not Silicon Valley companies. These are your hospitals, your universities, your banks, CVS, organizations like that everywhere across the country.
Yeah, I mean that is a really good point. Is that the jobs that are available are not just in technology; they're all over the place. I have some statistics here: internists, doctors, heavy and tractor trailer truck drivers, marketing managers, sales managers, human resource managers, people that don't really have specifically technology backgrounds. So that's interesting. Now, Tom, you're working on a really cool product, and I saw it maybe a year or so ago at a conference here. I was like, it's amazing. And when you told me what it was, it took me like a little while to kind of wrap my brain around a free MBA. Like that's like kind of the opposite of what. And we did a show a year ago about MBAs, and we had the dean of the business school at American University, and you were on. So tell us what's been going on tell people first what it is.
Yeah. So thanks for having me on again, Lauren. The company was founded really on passion for education first and foremost. My co-founders and I felt that a lot of the online education offerings out there were very sort of broadcast driven, very passive, and that's not good when you're learning a skill. So the sort of at the core of the company is a sort of vision that there's a better teaching method that can be converted from what you would do, let's say in the real world where you'd be hands-on trying to learn the thing by doing it. How can you do that in a technology-enabled environment? And so as we built that and fine-tuned that over the years, we sort of had a big breakthrough and started getting efficacy studies done that showed dramatic learning outcomes for students and incredible acceleration of learning where, something that would normally take, 200 hours, we could get done in 40 hours.
Wow.
And so by transforming the paradigm of learning time and the types of outcomes you can have in terms of and the way we look at it is we're programming your brain, we're building associations in your brain so they're very quick and you're very fluent in them. All of that could change, how people learn using technology. But our vision all the time when we were working on this was that we wanted to effectively, break not just the boundaries of how people learn, but also how people can access learning. And so by trying to make education free, you essentially have to build the other part of the talent equation, which is the job placement engine. And so we've been at work on that literally since I last saw you, because while we had to have a solid foundation with the learning so that we knew that we could convert someone from not knowing very much to being proficient in a skill, the new step we've been working on has been to sort of create a delightful matching engine that allows employers to essentially discover talent in a different way than they do today.
And can you say how many folks that you've placed?
So we're just getting started. I mean, we've had MBA students. We have placed many students, but we're talking in the hundreds of graduates.
Right.
So it's still small numbers, but we've focused essentially on a small segment of the population to get that right. But we're already on the content side in terms of the learning courseware, building a lot more that will allow us to really go way beyond the MBA, which is the vision for the company.
Right. I know a year ago when we were talking, Tom was telling me about how he would love to learn how to use like a scientific instrument, and but he just wants to learn how to use it, and how does that work, right? So you can get the education on your phone, and then maybe go to a facility that has those devices where you can just learn how to use it. You don't have to go get a PhD or whatever, but to reduce the barriers to knowledge.
That's it. And so I guess the anecdote that I shared with you last time was that if I could do my life again, I would go back and do biology and sort of go into one of the biosciences fields, maybe biotech or something. That would have been cool. It's too
We
late.
would have missed out on this conversation.
Yeah, it's too late now, and I think many of us feel that way. Like we make choices when we're full of hormones at 16, 17, 18, and that's across the socioeconomic spectrum, and then we live with those for the rest of our lives. And so, what Karen's doing, what we're trying to do, I think it's, and many others are working on, is to try to really transform that so that, you can change your life throughout your life.
Cool. Well, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to The Lauren Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, here on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. We'll be back in just a minute. Hi, I'm Lauren Epstein, and you're listening to The Lauren Epstein Show, where we talk about jobs, careers, and the workplace, here on 96.7 FM. If you're interested in being on the show, you can give me a call at 240-876-0276 or email me at Lorne, Lorne, at electriccow.com. You can check out our Facebook page, which is Lauren Epstein, and also our Mixcloud account. So if you go to mixcloud.com, Lauren Epstein, you'll find our shows. Thanks so much. Hi, welcome back. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein. This is the Lauren Epstein Show. Today we're talking about organizations solving the skills gap. And with me I have my guests, Tom Adams and Karan Chopra. So Karan, let's talk about the problem, because I think it's kind of like, oh, yeah, it's there. But what is fundamentally the problem, Karan? What do you think?
It's multifaceted. I think the simple answer that people give to the problem is, what if we could train people? There are these jobs that are there, and there are people who can't access the jobs because they don't have the skills. So let's just train them to get the skills. And that, I think, is a simplistic and incorrect view of the problem. I actually think the problem has to start on the hiring side, which is the demand side of the labor market, not necessarily the supply side. Today, the vast majority of hiring is done based on pedigree proxies. By that, I mean a degree from a selective university, linear work experience. Have you been doing this exact same job for a few years somewhere else?
Yeah.
Or a referral. Is there someone in the social professional network who is telling me to take a chance on you? And what that does is it screens out millions of people. So to give you a statistic, there are about 35 roughly million people who started college and didn't finish. If most of the middle skill job descriptions you pick up say 4-year degree required, which they do, that is automatically screening out the 35 million people. We are telling those 35 million people that you haven't learned anything. You didn't learn anything in your life experience. You didn't learn anything in some college you went to before you dropped out. You didn't learn anything on the job. You're not giving those people a chance to demonstrate. And so what is the incentive of that person to then go get trained? Because they could learn it. They could learn it in a 3-month boot camp. They could learn it through the revolutionary work that Tom is doing. At the end of the day, if they're going to be filtered out in the first screen through an applicant tracking system in the HR department of a company, then that training is not going to yield. So for me, part of the problem is we have to change the currency of value in the labor market, from pedigree proxies to demonstrations of skill, to effort, to contribution, to things that actually matter.
So I don't know if you know this, but for the last 21 years, I've been in talent acquisition. And a few years ago, I was leading the talent acquisition, which is recruiting, of a global software company. And we needed to hire recruiters for our offices in India. And I'd never been to India. I never hired people in India. So what I did was, for about 5 or 6 weeks, I Skype called 120 or 30 recruiters. And from that group, who also had like a pre-screening, from that group I picked more than a dozen to come to one of the cities, Trivandrum, to our office on a Saturday for the whole day. So we flew them in around the country, and in India, it's not particularly expensive. And they all came into the room we had set up, and then I had this full day of exercises. So the first thing I had them do was pair off into groups, 2 people, like little pairs, and just talk. I didn't tell them what was coming, just talk to each other for a little bit. And then one at a time, I had each of them stand up and say about the person they just talked to. So I got to see how well they listened, how well they can present somebody, and how well they can communicate like important stuff. We did that, and then after that, I had them write job descriptions. I had the VPs there, so they worked with them and wrote actual job descriptions. And then after that, we sent them off into cubicles with a different pair, and we got them on the phone in front of our recruiting tools and had them make calls and recruit people. We actually hired a couple of people out of this event. But very quickly, and I this is a horrible term, but the wheat and the chaff started separating. The people we really wanted just showed up. And it made me think when, the NBA or the NFL hire somebody, they do not sit down and have a conversation about how they feel about what's their 5-year goals or what are their strengths and weaknesses. It's like, what are your numbers? Let's see you on the field. Every football team, every summer, they bring 80 guys in and they just see who plays well. Because that's, and even then, they make big mistakes.
Right.
RG3 here in DC, right? You make big hiring mistakes. So in my sense, I feel like there really is not a perfect answer. You can do well, but never really perfect because human beings are so imperfect to predict that I believe exactly what you're saying. I have seen so little correlation often between the pedigree and the fit because the fit is in a system and the fit is a whole bunch of things that are non-quantifiable in just a one-on-one talking interview. So I'm excited about your point of view because I do think, listen, if you're an employer, trust me, you have got to hire for skill and ability. I mean, all of the Lou Adler, who was on the show, says that he's been doing this forever. That you need to figure out ways to interview people where you're actually seeing if they can do what it is they say they can do and what you need done. And in the system, another friend of mine who runs a consulting company, they do big data science stuff, and he would go to Harvard or MIT every year and they would interview somebody. And I said, why don't you try this? Take all of your engineers, your scientists, get a room, have the candidate come in, and for an hour, work out a problem. See how that goes. And he loved it, right? Because it's no more him asking questions, trying to figure out. It's like, see how it works. So, I didn't mean to take you off what you're saying, but so in part, the problem is employers. Big part, that's where it starts.
And I agree, and I would add that employers also have a business to run. So our view is not that employers, they do need a proxy. They need a way to screen because they can't sit down with 2,000 resumes, 2,000 LinkedIn profiles and try to sort through them individually.
Right.
And so a lot of what we're working on is co-developing easy ways for them to validate based on skills and use that as the first screen. You can still have your second round, third round, fourth round interview to assess things like fit, to assess other things that are specific to your organization. But we also have to provide easy ways for employers to do this and not expect them to rethink their entire processes ground up, employer by employer. And you do need a collective set of employers doing it a certain way. So the analogy I like to use is the AP exams and colleges and schools. The AP is demonstration of skill, of college level work that colleges have then accepted as ways of validation, and schools can then say yes, or every individual can take it and say, yes, I'm ready, or I'm not ready, I have demonstrated, or I've not demonstrated. And very importantly, if you have not demonstrated, what is the feedback that you get? So in our validation solutions, all the individuals who go through it, they get feedback. They get feedback on why they're not ready yet, what is it that they need to work on, and come again. Because in every job interview today, you do not get feedback.
Right.
You get rejected and you do not know why.
Right.
So what is it that you do differently? And that information exists.
Yeah.
It exists with the HR person or it exists in the system that assessed you, right? That information is there. It's lost and it's not provided to the individual who is the one who could get the most value from that information.
So I want to hear from Tom about what you think the problem is, but I want to just interject because I have interviewed, probably in the tens of thousands of people now. And I will sometimes tell people if I think that they can handle it, what the feedback was. But generally, I think I and a lot of HR professionals have a fear of, if I really tell you what it was, you're going to sue me.
That's right.
Right? So maybe we need some change in the laws. Like, it's like, okay. Like, you tell people, as long as it has nothing to do with the things that are protected classes, that you can just tell them. And that might help employers do it.
So we do a mock interview, in which case you can do it because it's not a real interview as part of the validation.
Right.
So,
So, Tom, what do you think the problem's been?
So I think it's complex. That's probably the starting point. But I would say that, if you just look at your own hiring experience, I think it's, there is obviously in certain jobs, especially in technical jobs, there's an enormous importance placed on skill. Can you do it? But if you go beyond that, which is most jobs are non-technical, it's really about your sort of core aptitude. Like, how does your mind work best? What kind of problems are you best at? And also your attitude. How do you approach life and how do you relate to other people? And I think that while we're sort of obviously most helpful and most focused on developing skill in our students, if you look at the design of our sort of profile page for our students and how we try to shine the light on who they are and what they can bring to the table, that effort has been very focused on humanizing the candidate early on and trying to convey, hey, this is someone who's, the number one thing they think they bring to the table is problem solving, or this person's number one thing is leadership, because our number one thing tends to be what people pay us for,
right?
Because people don't pay you for your number four thing, and you do your number four thing because you have to survive. But where is it that you really stand out? And so trying to capture that early in the process and surface that when employers are sort of scanning through our candidate books, they're virtual, sort of on your phone or your computer, allows us to sort of essentially build a pattern, because we'll see by the choices that the hiring manager is making in terms of doesn't seem like what I want. We're able to now start surfacing resumes based on non-experience attributes. Because I agree with Karan that the ATS system and culture and the filtering is a real problem, and it impacts how we think about fairness in the world. It just feels like just because you got the formula right very early on doesn't mean that you should have that advantage all your life.
Right.
And so we're hoping to try to migrate employers over time towards being much more opportunistic about what am I getting with, if I hire Lorne, what do I get? And, what is your thing? And it's not necessarily that Excel or that C++ or that you are a good writer. It might be those things, but it might be a set of soft attributes.
I think some of it is like a vestige of how we used to work, right? I mean, basically years ago, you just needed that one skill and you just did that one thing. And now, because we're knowledge workers, we need lots of skills, and a lot of them are hard to quantify. You talk about, how do you work well in a team, right? How do you think? One of the companies I worked for, the chief engineer would interview people by just saying, okay, show me something that you built. And they would draw it on the board, and he would promptly take it apart. Like, why did you do this? And why did you do that? And his questioning was really designed to understand how they think, because he knows, and anybody who's been working for a while knows that it's not about what you know now. It's about how can you learn and how can you synthesize all these things together, particularly if you're coming to their company, which is a whole new system, right? A whole new set of relationships. So for you, in part, the problem statement is that employers don't see people holistically. They've just been seeing people as a laundry list of skills. I
would qualify it more by saying I think that the filtering is happening based on the wrong criteria. So I'm sort of agreeing with Karan that what we're trying to say. So, for example, there's we have our MBA is elite. The idea is to build essentially something comparable to the top business schools. And so we have the same type of students, same type of education, same type of employers. And so it's a sort of end-to-end system that's essentially like Tesla started with a sports car to beat Ferrari. It was a very useful way to motivate the team. And then you democratize from there. That's how we've approached it. So, for example, for us, we have someone who's done all the right things. They've gone to Harvard. They're working for an investment bank, but they don't like their job. They don't like their life. And, that person has been arduous their whole life, and they're in the wrong place. And so this notion of helping people, for me, is very broad. It's not just socioeconomic, but everyone can get into the wrong situation. And so what she wants to do is she wants to work in product management, in California. And so how do you surface her core skills?
Right.
And if she just submits her resume in an ATS, it'll be like, I don't know what to do with her. Yeah. She has never done it. And so that's what we're trying to overcome.
A lot of recruiters and HR professionals have these arguments with their hiring managers about, look, I talked to this person. They would be great here, even though they don't have this. Like the resume bias there's just a very strong bias around the resume. And you said the pedigrees and the checking the box. So are there any other problems that we see in this system? Because after we talk about the problems, I'd like to talk about, how you've implemented some of these solutions and what we can see going forward.
Well, let me be more specific about what I think the skill development problem is, which is that many people have looked at the MOOCs and the post-secondary education platforms and sort of considered them as e-learning or what learning will look like for a long time to come. But the reality is when you're explaining something like data science, and that is a very complicated thing, you need to actually be doing it, etc. You're going to just listen to a video and someone's explaining it, and then it's essentially assessing your understanding. But we don't pay for people who understand stuff. It's not school, right? And what we want is we want to have people who can be given a new set of inputs and for them to react to that and do something useful with it.
Right.
And so the way we teach is essentially with interactions that are occurring once every 8 seconds. So I don't know if you have a sense of what a normal learning experience is, but essentially people are sitting back with their headphones on, listening to a video from a video professor, and they might chop up the videos into smaller bits, but it's the same things, the same posture. They're leaning back in their chair watching this. And that is not education. And somehow the world has gotten that wrong. Yeah. The whole world.
Right.
Like I go to ed tech conferences, and all the people on stage are essentially the Coursera's, the edX's, the Khan Academies. And everyone believes that that is a valid way of educating. And if your own children went to a classroom and the teacher was talking all the time and they were sitting back, leaning back, you'd want your money back. You'd say, this is a joke. I don't want my kids to be educated this way. I want something Montessori-like. I want them to be hands-on, make project-based or game-based learning or whatever, play-based. So we wouldn't tolerate that in the physical world, but somehow we've abdicated judgment in the virtual world. And that's what we're really trying to fight for, is interactive learning. Many people have been obsessed about adaptive learning. Adaptive is a tiny part of
what's adaptive learning?
Adaptive was this holy grail that because the way people learn most successfully early on in tests was with tutoring, the assumption was that tutors were effective because essentially they adapted to you. The reality is that most of the benefit of the tutor is the feedback, and that the feedback is targeted at what you've done. So the adaptive technologies used to be that you would go into a system, the system would not know what you knew, and based on what you got right or wrong, it would serve up the next best activity, kind of like Netflix would recommend a video. And so it was kind of set up for buzz because it's kind of machine learning and AI. But the reality is the problem is much more basic. It's that when you don't get something right, does the feedback come at you in a way that's useful, in a way where you can interpret the feedback and know what to do with it? And so part of I think what's revolutionary about our approach is that by having interactions every 8 seconds, we're giving you feedback constantly. So we give you feedback something like 60 times, in a single lesson. And so it's just an order of magnitude different than traditional e-learning.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Hi, my name's Lauren Epstein, and every week at 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock on Mondays, I talk about jobs and careers and the workplace. We've done shows on pot in the workplace, the salary secrecy laws, and how to write a resume. I'm inviting you to come on our show. If you're interested or have show ideas, you can give me a call at 240-876-0276 or email me at lauren@electriccow.com. Or you can go to our webpage at laurenepstein.com or our Facebook page, which is also Lauren Epstein, and our Mixcloud account is, and you guessed it, Lauren Epstein at mixcloud.com. Hope to see you here on the show soon. If you want to sell more to HR and TA professionals, we can help you bring your brand into the ears of over 100,000 decision makers around the world. To advertise on this and other shows, contact us at lauren@laurenepstein.com. Welcome back. You're listening to The Lauren Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, and we are talking about the skills gap. Karan, so we talked about the problems. Is there anything else that you think fundamentally is wrong? I mean, we're getting into like some of the real social, how education was formed. Yeah. It was a bunch of really smart people to create this didactic learning system, which really doesn't work.
Yeah.
And we punish people who can't handle it because they're not built that way.
So we've talked about hiring, we've talked about learning. I'd like to talk about financing, which is also, I think, a huge part of the problem and a way in which it's completely broken in the market that affects the skills gap. And I will give a few examples of that. So today, if you are an individual, you could learn basic skills to become an entry-level web developer, which is about a $55,000, $60,000 a year job. You can do it through, say, a 3-month immersive bootcamp program, which costs $15,000 to do. It's full-time immersive, so if you're poor, I mean, the target demographic we serve are low-income, typically underrepresented, overlooked individuals. You probably need about $25,000 because you need to pay your bills, you need to pay your rent while you're doing it. You can't work part-time while you're learning that. And if you want to get that and you try to get a loan, your loan is going to be based on your FICO score, based on your credit score. 70 million Americans don't have a credit score or have a poor one. So you are screened out of the financing from the private financing market. So that's one problem. How we decide who can get access for education. Number two, who is responsible for the outcomes? The educators typically bear no risk for the outcomes.
That's right.
They get paid upfront, irrespective. So how do you actually change the system for them to share in the risk and to have a portion of the revenue tied to, did you deliver your outcomes? Did you deliver what you said you were going to do? The third thing I would say is then make the individual's payments tied to their outcomes too. So we have this issue today in the market where there are many people who are saddled with debt and didn't get a degree or didn't get what they were supposed to get and do not have a good outcome. And finally, I would say in the financing system, something that's broken is very rarely do employers pay. If you think about employers as the customer of the market, we're saying from the Skills app, we're relying on colleges or training programs or workforce programs or nonprofits to prepare people for the workforce. But where is the link between the customer that needs that and the institutions or the people that are tied to actually delivering those skills or helping individuals gain those skills?
Well, let's start there as far as solutions, right? I mean, Tom, you have ideas on the financing of this, right? Your software is free. What's the model that you think, Tom, that would work and overcome those challenges? Yeah,
so I think that it all depends on your cost structure. Obviously, the physical boot camps that have people there, it could be 3 months, but it could be even 12 months. Some of them, they can't. It's very, very hard for them to go 100% free. And they, the most progressive things I've seen there are the sort of income sharing agreements. But if you're in the software industry, I actually think it's a very sort of good configuration, an honest configuration to be free, because your marginal cost should get down to zero. It's not quite that, because obviously you have some services that go along with it, but you try to reduce your costs as much as you can at the marginal level, invest in technology that is extremely effective, and you can test it the way you test any technology to make sure it really works. But I think ultimately, as Karan said, money is a big problem in education. Money has brought in regulators that have essentially cost us a lot of innovation because it's much more difficult to come up with new big ideas and at the same time access traditional funding sources. I'm talking about things like accreditation and so forth, where it's extremely strictly defined, and it's a multi-year process that's very anti-innovation.
And Smartly is accredited.
Yeah, so we are licensed by the OSSE, and we are going into the Office of the State Superintendent here in D.C., which is the regulator of educational institutions here in the D.C. area, and that covers us for the whole of the United States and more. But accreditation is actually a multi-year process that you go through, where you work and they sort of study your performance, and they look at your structure and make suggestions of changes and so forth. So that takes many years. And in some categories like business education, if you're going to get all the accreditations that are required, it's almost 10 years. And so the system is sort of designed that way because it makes sense when the fees are so high. So if you're charging $200,000 for degrees, or $100,000 or $50,000, and a lot of the money for that is coming from government loans, there has to be a regulator. And so I'm sort of cognizant of that. But as we're pushing towards making education free, it actually, it changes a lot of the dynamics, and it means that students can do this because they want to. They don't have to make a big trade-off with their family. And part of what makes us able to do it is we have very high graduation rates. So we have over 72% of our students in our last cohort went through an entire MBA online, and by sort of having that level of engagement, you suddenly have lots of people to sell. It's a different opportunity set.
So your model is that the people that go through the program, then you say to companies that are looking to hire MBAs, hey, you can hire these folks.
Yeah.
And there's a fee.
Yep. And so it's 10% of their first year income.
Which is not bad.
Yeah. For most companies, they're accustomed to sometimes paying 20-25% of a year's salary.
Now, that's been going down. When I first started in recruiting as an agency recruiter, we were getting 25 and 30%, and companies were paying, $25,000, $30,000, $40,000. I actually heard a friend of mine place somebody for $1 million salary.
And so you went on vacation for that.
30% fee. Wow. So, but that's kind of going a little bit away. But still, $10,000. We try to, a lot of companies I work for try to target between $5,000 and $15,000 to place. So we'll spend the money because we know that person's going to help us earn money. So there is a number, right? And companies are willing to do it. Yeah. Now, have the states or the federal government said, hey, we have a stake at this too. If these people are working, we collect, revenue. Are they doing anything?
I have seen in certain places some positive movements towards having pay for performance or pay for success, in the sense of channeling either workforce dollars or other dollars towards outcomes, job outcomes, in which case you don't then just tie all the dollars to the inputs, either who wrote the best application for those dollars, or things like accreditation, which may have happened many years ago, are no longer sort of real time in terms of delivering outcomes, to say, if you can deliver this training, deliver a placement, and deliver an outcome, we are going to spend X, or we will give you X dollars, which ties the incentives directly to those outcomes. And I think where those dollars are particularly helpful are for things like wraparound services or other services that particularly a low-income individual needs, because it's not just paying for the training. There are things that come up: childcare, living stipend, paying for food, paying for transportation. That if it is an immersive program where you have to show up somewhere every day, and even in Tom's model, I'll be curious if it's a full-time thing where you can't work while you're doing it because of the intensity of the program. We have to think holistically about what does that mean for who we're serving.
So there's an organization called YearUp, which is a sponsor of our show. We love YearUp. And they have a program where they take kids 18 to 24, 25. They give them 6 months of hands-on practical training and then a 6-month job. And all through that time, they're making sure that their financial needs are met.
Right.
And it comes from donors and also the companies that are going to be hiring them.
Yeah.
So there are systems out there.
And a solution.
But what about? Were you talking about before whether there are any governments or state entities that give companies like us money because we placed somebody? I don't know of that. I think that's a very interesting idea, actually.
Yeah, I mean that's what I think. I think my vision is that all these folks kind of get around the table, and the state's pony up some dollars or credits, and the federal ponies up some dollars and credits, and creates that, and creates the. Hey, you don't have to have the accreditation if it's like this. It could be like this because we know that these people can do it. And it's certified. We all agree.
And where you're seeing some innovation in that is actually in the workforce dollars, not in the
So when you say workforce dollars, I should have asked you earlier, what do you mean by workforce dollars?
I mean, this is dollars that are then allocated and adjudicated by the Department of Labor, either at the federal level or at the state and local level. So it's coming out of those budgets as opposed to...
And that money goes to who?
Higher education. Those typically go to education or training programs that can show that they can deliver a job outcome for an individual, but they also have eligibility criteria on who those individuals are. So they would say, these are individuals who should be unemployed or underemployed, which I think is perfectly fair because that is who, that is who the dollars should be serving, right, in that system. So I see innovation happening in that lane, which is different from the traditional higher education spend.
Very cool.
I'll say one thing that we are piloting in DC, actually, with General Assembly, which is a coding bootcamp, is a whole new way of financing this, where an individual will be given financing to go through a 3-month program to become a web developer as a pilot.
When you say financing, you mean a loan?
It's not a loan. It's a share of their income. So it's an income sharing agreement. But the decision...
so once they get a job, they have to pay...
Correct. They have to pay a portion of their income with a cap and a threshold. So if you don't make at least $35,000, you pay nothing. If you make above $90,000, you just stay at that. And the financing decision is not based on your credit score at all. It's only based on, is this a provider that has demonstrated good outcomes?
So for someone who's making $90,000, what are they kicking in every year?
So for someone who's making, so the other thing I'd say is you can prepay at any time 1.5 times the amount. So if it's $15,000, if it's $15,000,
you're paying interest.
You could prepay.
You just said 1.5 times the original amount.
If you want to prepay it at any point, you
so
just
that's
pay that
1.5 times of what you're actually using.
If that is a position where you can prepay that, if you want to prepay that.
So there's a 50% VIG on this thing.
Over 5 years, which is less than what you actually get if you have a 8 or 9% loan. It's less than what you would pay.
What is the percentage? My math is horrible.
So it ends up being something in the 7 to 8% range, but
it's still high.
The other thing I would say is if you did not get a job, or over the period of 5 years, if you're making $50,000, you're only paying. If you're making $50,000, you're only paying about $16,000 or $17,000 in all, over a $15,000 initial commitment. So you have complete insurance on this.
So when does the amount end? When you've paid
5 years.
Oh, 5 years.
That's it.
Oh, I see.
So
it's whatever you can pay in the next 5 years.
Whatever you can pay, and if you started a job and 2 years later you lost your job, and for a year you were unemployed.
And that's why you're charging the 8%, because you have people who are
for those who are higher.
So we need to change that financing so that you can offer a lower rate, or get the government involved, get the employers involved,
But importantly, also, the decision is not based on your credit score at all, which is what makes it inclusive.
Yeah. Yeah. If
Like-
you can help those people actually get the job and the employer is just kind of having to do the hiring like we're talking about, then the employer's happy to pay.
Exactly. And you just pay it down.
Happy to write a check for 5, 10, 15 grand. Cool. So, okay, the future. You guys are now in positions of ultimate power over the universe. Tom, what would you do?
So I think, to some extent, a lot of our problems are based on legacy. So
But quick,
if I could-
we only got a couple minutes left.
if I could wave a wand,
Yes, wave
I
your
would,
wand.
I would sort of, I would retire LinkedIn and those types of platforms. I think that they got us down a pathway, and obviously they have tremendous power now in the marketplace, but they're configured, I think, in a suboptimal way. And then, I would also obviously transform online education so that it was totally interactive and we didn't have any sort of leaning back moments when we're learning.
Karan?
I would do two things. The first is have a collective network of employers who hold hands together and say, this is how we are going to hire. We are going to do it based on demonstrations of skills and aptitude, and do it as a collective, not as bespoke relationships with each training providers. Is to build that network is the first thing. I'll leave the learning and the pedagogy to Tom to transform. And the last thing I would do is rewire the entire financing with the low-income individual at the center of that design, and all tied to pay for success, actually paying for what you think you are buying from education.
So my vision is that the student dictates the kind of education they get. Because for some kids, a didactic education is perfect. That's exactly what they need. And for some of us like myself, Montessori was great, and that hands-on learning is great, and that we have an infinite number of learning methodologies to support the person who needs the learning, and that is completely free. That is part of our social agreement between each other. I'm going to make sure, and you're going to make sure, that we each have all the learning, and not just from the first 20 years of our lives, but forever. Forever, because when you get to be 60 or 70, you may have interest in working but not have the skills, and that is just a waste, right? I mean, a waste of someone's life and a waste of the possibility of productivity and economic churn. That's how the economy goes, right? People spend money, that keeps things moving. So that's my vision. So we're going to wrap up the show. Tom, how can folks reach you if they want to?
Yeah, so they should just go to smart.ly, and they can see there both if they're an employer looking for amazing talent, and then also students, obviously, if they're trying to learn something new.
Awesome. And Karan?
Terrific. You could go to www.opportunityatwork, opportunityatwork.org, or email info at opportunityatwork.org.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming. This was a fantastic show. You've been listening to The Lauren Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, here on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. You have a great week. We'll see you next week at 10 a.m. on 96.7 FM.